"Relax, Corinne. It's just soup," Ivy said, smiling across the table. I remember the way the spoon felt heavier than it should have in my hand. Porcelain, warm. I lifted it, breathed in, and thought briefly that maybe I'd been unfair. That maybe I was reading too much into things again. One spoonful, that was all it took. The moment it touched my tongue, my throat tightened as if a fist had closed around it. Not gradually, not politely. It seized. I tried to swallow and couldn't. Air scraped in sharp and thin, and panic surged faster than my body could process. My hand slammed into the table. I could hear the sound dull and wrong, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't even cough properly. My chest burned as I tried to drag in another breath. Ivy leaned back in her chair, wine glass still balanced between her fingers. "She always says she's allergic," she said lightly, glancing around the table. "It's probably nerves. Nerves." I wanted to laugh, but my lips were already tingling, swelling. I reached for my throat, clawing at skin that felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. Jordan stared at me, frozen. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked from me to Ivy as if waiting for someone to explain what he was seeing. I didn't need an explanation. I knew exactly what was happening. I had seen this reaction on patients more times than I could count. I had held hands, timed pulses called codes. I had never imagined I would recognize the signs in my own body. A chair scraped back. A man I didn't know, someone seated across the table, not family, stood abruptly and moved toward me. His face had gone sharp with focus. He reached into his bag and pulled out an EpiPen. Relief and terror collided in my chest. I had always believed danger announced itself loudly. I was wrong. Sometimes it arrived smiling across a dinner table, and by the time you understood, your body was already closing in on itself, carrying you toward the next room, where everything would finally be explained. The ER hallway hummed low and constant, like a fluorescent secret no one wanted to hear. I sat, wrapped in 2 thin blankets, still cold from the inside out. My throat burned where life had tried to exit. My fingers shook, not from the reaction anymore, but from what came after. The doctor didn't ask many questions. My records were clear. He glanced between my chart and the red band around my wrist. Shellfish. Anaphylaxis. Medical alert. He asked who served me the food. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He nodded. Perhaps used to silence from women like me, tired, polite, taught not to escalate. Ivy's voice rang louder in my head than any monitor. She probably skipped her meds she'd told the guests after the ambulance left. It's not that serious. Except it was. And she knew that. She'd seen my alert bracelet a dozen times. She'd rolled her eyes at it before made offhand jokes about how fragile I'd become. But what unsettled me most wasn't Ivy. It was Jordan. He sat at the foot of the hospital bed, shoulders rounded like a schoolboy caught cheating. She told me that yours was a special mushroom version. I studied his face, but there was nothing to draw from it. No rage, no fear, not even guilt. Just distance, like he was reporting the weather. I didn't think she'd lie about that, he added, looking at the floor. I didn't answer. I just turned my head toward the ceiling. It was blank, like a sheet of paper someone had forgotten to write on. I let my eyes stay there staring into nothing, because anything else would have required me to feel. The nurse came in with a clipboard, said I could go home within the hour. I nodded, but I knew already I wasn't going back to the same house I'd left. Something had shifted, and I needed to understand how far it had been pushed before it broke. The first dinner at Ivy and Jordan's felt like a test I didn't know I was failing. I'd brought a sweet potato gratin, simple, familiar, the kind of dish I used to make when Jordan was in high school. I left it in the kitchen with a note on how long it needed to warm. Hours passed. It never made it to the table. After the meal, I asked if I could take the dish home. Ivy blinked, smiled too wide, and said, "Oh, I think we already rinsed it and packed it somewhere. I'll find it for you next time." There wasn't a next time. The pan was never returned. It should have been small, forgettable, but it wasn't. That was the first chip in a wall I didn't realize they were building between us. Over time, the pattern set in like grout. Ivy's dinners grew more curated, printed menus, artisanal cheeses, wines from vineyards I'd never heard of. She used phrases like locally sourced and palate cleanser. Jordan fell in line behind her, folding napkins with precision and serving plates like he'd been trained. I came in my best blouse and comfortable shoes. I always offered to help. Ivy always declined. I was seated near the patio door, near the coats, always closest to the exit. The first few visits, Jordan asked me about medications, about things he remembered from my time at the hospital. But eventually, that shifted too. He'd cut me off mid-sentence with a gentle "Mom, you're overthinking it." Or, "You're too intense about this stuff." It was always said with a smile, but it landed like a lock turning in a door I hadn't noticed was closed. Ivy didn't openly mock me. She was smarter than that. It came in glances and knowing laughs that stopped when I looked up. She spoke just loud enough for others to shift in their chairs, unsure if they should laugh too. By the time I realized I'd been moved from the center to the edges, it felt like I'd been sitting by the coats for years. And still, I kept showing up. Until the soup. 2 days after the hospital, while I was folding laundry and trying to convince myself it was all just a mistake, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "Hi. I hope you're okay. I'm the one who gave you the EpiPen." I stared at the screen. My heart climbed back into my throat, not from fear, but from something sharper. Anticipation. Recognition. Another message followed. I don't usually get involved, but what I saw that night, it wasn't right. I paused, fingers hovering over the keys. Then came the third text. I recorded part of it. I thought I was just filming the layout, it looked fancy, but I caught her pointing to the bowl. "The one with your initials." He sent the video. It was short, no more than 20 seconds. Silent. Crisp. Ivy stood near the kitchen entrance, her back turned halfway to the camera. She pointed at one specific bowl as the server nodded. He picked it up carefully, turned it slightly. I could just make out the letters written neatly on a folded card. CA. That was me. Corinne Adler. Ivy nodded again, smiled, and stepped away, sipping her wine as she returned to her seat. No second bowl. No hesitation. No switch. She hadn't just forgotten my allergy. She hadn't confused orders. She'd ensured that bowl went directly to me and only me. I watched the clip 3 times. My fingers were steady. My breath was not. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't, as Jordan tried to explain, a catering error. It was a decision. Made with a smile. Served with wine. I saved the video to a folder titled Medical, the same place I kept my prescription logs, allergy testing, and emergency contact form. Then I backed it up to a second drive, just in case. When I looked at my reflection in the window that night, I realized I didn't look scared. I looked ready. And in the morning, I made a call to the catering company. The next morning, I called the catering company myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. Years in operating rooms had taught me that tone mattered. Calm questions got honest answers faster than outrage ever did. "I'm trying to understand something I said. Was there shrimp on the menu that night?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Papers shifting. A keyboard clicking. "No," the woman finally replied. The menu was entirely vegetarian. "That was very important to your daughter-in-law." She emphasized it more than once. My hand tightened around the phone. Then how did I end up with shrimp bisque? Another pause. Longer this time. "Well, there was one exception," she said carefully. "Your daughter-in-law requested a single seafood bisque. She said it was for her mother-in-law." I closed my eyes. She offered to send over the prep notes immediately. 10 minutes later, an email arrived with scanned kitchen sheets attached. I opened them slowly, like I was reviewing imaging before surgery. There it was. In Ivy's handwriting, sharp, confident, unmistakable, were the words, "One shrimp bisque, for Corinne Adler only." The rest of the page listed pumpkin soup. 1 pot, 1 batch. Served to every other guest at the table. No variations, no substitutions, no room for error. I scrolled through the timestamps. The notes had been written hours before the dinner. Approved, initialed, confirmed. This hadn't happened in the chaos of service. It hadn't been a slip of the ladle or a distracted server. It was planned when the kitchen was quiet and clean, when choices were deliberate. The bowl had been labeled. It had been prepared separately. It had been carried out with care and placed exactly where it was meant to go. To me, I forwarded the email to myself, printed 2 copies, and placed them neatly beside the video file. Evidence liked order. I'd always known that. By the time Jordan knocked on my door that afternoon, I already knew this wasn't something I could talk my way out of or forgive my way through. Jordan arrived around 4, holding a bouquet of tulips I didn't need. I opened the door, stepped aside, and let him in without a word. He hovered near the kitchen counter like a guest in someone else's house. His eyes darted everywhere but toward mine. I set 2 mugs on the table and waited. "She didn't mean harm," he finally said, settling into the chair across from me. "It was just a lot. The dinner, the people from the firm, the pressure." He ran a hand through his hair. "You know how Ivy gets when she's stressed." I didn't answer. I reached for the folder I'd placed on the table that morning, waiting just in case. I slid it toward him. Inside, copies of my allergy records going back 15 years, the ER report, the photo of my medical bracelet, the caterer's handwritten notes, and the still frame from the video, the one where Ivy smiled as the bowl marked CA was handed over. Jordan stared at the folder like it might catch fire. He started, then stopped. "Look, I don't think she meant for you to actually get sick. I think she thought it would scare you not." He cut himself off, finally looking at me. I met his eyes. "She told you it was mushroom." He blinked. "What, that night? At the table? She told you it was mushroom soup." He didn't speak. "And you watched me collapse," I said. "You watched a stranger pull a pen from his bag while you sat frozen." He flinched like I'd struck him. "I just want to keep this from getting out of hand," he said quietly. "Please, let's not escalate." I stood, walked to the counter, poured the coffee anyway. By the time I returned, his chair was empty. The tulips sat on the table unopened. His mug hadn't been touched, not a single sip. I stared at the flowers for a long time before picking them up, walking them to the back porch, and placing them gently in the trash bin. Then I picked up the folder and dialed my lawyer. I gave myself 1 week. 7 days to gather document and assemble everything with the kind of precision I hadn't needed since I retired from surgery. Old instincts returned like muscle memory. Facts came first. Emotions came last. I compiled the ER bill, the cost of the ambulance, follow-up labs. My replacement EpiPens too, since I wasn't risking being caught without one again. The therapy referral my doctor insisted on, though I hadn't yet made the call. And the nights I hadn't slept, which weren't billable, but I included them anyway. Not for sympathy, just the record. Everything was organized. Dates, signatures, CPT codes. I even included mileage to and from the hospital. It wasn't rage that guided my hand. It was something colder, something sharper. I wasn't out for blood. I was charging for the wound. I sent the entire packet to my lawyer, who reviewed it and added the final page, a formal statement of claim. No lawsuit, not yet. Just a letter, a number. $187.50. It was delivered by courier, addressed not to Ivy personally, but to the firm where she worked. Attention, Ethics, and Compliance. The envelope was thick, flat, and impossible to ignore. The cover page included 3 things: a still image from the video, a copy of the caterer's note, and one sentence written in plain, neutral font: negligent harm of a medically vulnerable individual. That was all. No accusation, no demand for apology, just a bill for services rendered, for damages inflicted. The kind of document no one can dismiss as drama or overreaction. Clinical, controlled, exact. The silence afterward was its own kind of answer. 3 days passed before my lawyer called again. She said there had been a reply, not from Ivy, not from Jordan, from the firm's legal department. They wanted to discuss terms. I asked her to schedule a meeting. Then I made a second copy of the invoice and tucked it in a drawer just above the folder marked Final Directives. I didn't hear from Ivy directly at first. I heard about her reaction through Jordan, the way news always traveled now, filtered, softened, stripped of responsibility. "She thinks you're joking," he said on the phone. She texted me asking if this was some kind of scare tactic. I pictured her reading the invoice, laughing, passing it to a colleague like gossip. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. My lawyer had already sent the follow-up. This time, the letter didn't stop at Ivy's inbox. It went to the firm's ethics board, the managing partner, compliance, risk, all the places where laughter dies quickly. After that, the messages stopped. No texts, no calls, no half-hearted explanations. Silence settled in heavy and unmistakable. I recognized it immediately. It was the sound of people realizing the room had changed. 3 days later, my lawyer called. "They want to resolve this privately," she said. "They're requesting a meeting." The first offer came in writing. It was framed as a misunderstanding, a regrettable family incident. The number was neat, rounded, polite. My lawyer declined it without consulting me. The second offer arrived the next morning. Higher, urgent. This one came with a non-disclosure agreement attached, dense and airtight. Pages of language designed to bury a story before it reached daylight. I read every word. "I'm not signing that," I said. My lawyer paused. "You understand this could take longer without it." "I understand," I replied. "But I'm not being paid to forget what happened." I wasn't interested in hush money. I wasn't interested in smoothing edges or preserving reputations. I wanted the truth acknowledged exactly where it had been denied out loud on paper and without euphemisms. Let them call it inconvenient. Let them call it excessive. I had been called worse while gasping for air. That afternoon, my lawyer sent one final message. No counteroffer, no threat, just a sentence. My client is willing to discuss resolution once responsibility is formally acknowledged. I closed my laptop and sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, breathing evenly, knowing that the next response would tell me exactly how far this was going to go. The settlement came quietly. No announcement, no ceremony, just a wire transfer with a reference code and the legal equivalent of a sigh. I didn't frame the receipt. I didn't celebrate. I just called the real estate agent and told her I was ready to move forward. 6 weeks later, the old dental office on Maple Street was mine. It had been sitting empty for 2 years, forgotten, but sturdy with wide windows and enough space for 3 exam rooms and a waiting area. I spent most mornings repainting walls, installing shelves, ordering basic supplies. By spring, it had become what I needed it to be, a small clinic for low-income seniors, most of them on fixed incomes and tired of waiting 6 months for checkups no one remembered to schedule. We didn't do anything fancy. Vitals, screenings, medication reviews, listening. I didn't name it after myself. There was no ribbon cutting, no plaque, just a white door and a sign that said, "Welcome" in 5 languages. Thanksgiving came. I cooked for myself. A small pot of lentil soup heavy on garlic and thyme light on everything else. No toxins, No surprises. Just warmth. A few old friends came by. We ate quietly like people who knew the value of being able to breathe without fear. One of them asked if I'd heard from Jordan. I shook my head. It's better this way. No one asked again. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the leftovers packed, I opened the drawer where I kept my measuring spoons. Behind them, folded twice and clipped at the corner, was the final invoice. Stamped, paid in full. I didn't look at it often, just enough to remember it was real, that there had been a wound and that it had healed the way clean cuts do. Not with noise, but with care. The next morning, I opened the clinic like always. A woman with a swollen ankle was already waiting at the door, her coat zipped to her chin. I smiled, unlocked it, and let her in. She was exactly on time. I was in the supply room when the new nurse asked about the framed paper on the wall. It hung near the door, tucked between the inventory chart and the emergency exit plan. Most people didn't notice it, but she had sharp eyes and the kind of curiosity I respected. It's not a license, I said as I closed the cabinet of EpiPens. She looked closer. Then what is it, a reminder? She tilted her head. Of what? I paused, adjusting a box of gloves back into place. That cutting something out doesn't always mean harm, I said quietly. Sometimes it means survival. She didn't ask anything else. She just nodded once and walked out to prep the front desk. The framed page was a copy of the invoice, the one that started it all. Not for show, not for pride, just clarity. In an office built to heal, I wanted at least one thing left untouched by apology. The clinic was quiet that evening. Most of our patients came early, and the winter dark always sent people home faster. I checked the logs, turned off the exam lights, and locked up behind me. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. The kind of cold that didn't hide, the kind that told the truth. No calls from Jordan, no messages from Ivy. That silence used to ache like a bruise you couldn't press without wincing. Now it just was. Like weather. Some things don't break loudly. Some relationships don't end with screams or doors slamming. They end in ER hallways, unsigned cards, laughter that lingers long after you leave the room. And then, if you're lucky, they're gone. Not erased, not forgotten, just removed. Precisely. I stepped into the parking lot, my breath fogging the air. The lights behind me flickered off one by one as the timer clicked down. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The wound had closed. Not jagged, not ragged, but clean, controlled, intentional. Like something cut away with a practiced hand because something better was finally allowed to grow.